Habits are an important part of our daily lives, but they never work as we want them to. We cling to bad habits and we have trouble sticking to good habits. In this video, we will try to figure out how to deal with habits. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I'd like to talk about how we can change habits. We already discussed two interesting books about the topic of habits, Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit and James Clear's Atomic Habits. And there were lots of interesting tips and strategies in them, but today I'd like to sum those up in a shorter video. I will give a brief introduction, what habits are all about, talk about the habit loop, then I will briefly discuss how we can change bad habits, how we can get rid of bad habits, and finally I will say a few words about how we can establish good habits. So for starters, what are habits all about? Habits are procedures, actions that are highly automatic, that basically occur on autopilot without a lot of conscious thought or conscious attention. For example, I might be prone to chew on my pencil without really realizing it. There is a basic structure to how habits work, the so-called habit loop. It consists of a few components. First of all, there is a cue that triggers the habit. In the case of chewing on my pencil, it might be a certain emotional state. If I am nervous, I start chewing on my pencil. So being nervous is the cue. After the cue occurs, I will perform a certain routine, a certain action or sequence of actions, such as chewing on my pencil. And that leads to a certain reward. In the case of the pencil, maybe it is a bit of distraction that lessens my nervousness. James Clear has a fourth component to his habit loop. He says basically what motivates us is not the reward itself, because the reward only occurs at the very end. We have to wait a long time for that. But what motivates us is the craving for the reward. So Clear's habit loop consists of the cue, followed by the craving, followed by the routine or response, followed by the reward. It's the same procedure described slightly differently. So how can we change bad habits? Charles Duhigg explains this in The Power of Habit. Now, bad news first, we can't really get rid of bad habits. It's difficult to just stop doing them. However, what we can do is change them. And we change them by sticking to the cue, sticking to the reward, but entering a different routine in the middle. And there is a nice example from Duhigg's own life. At some point he had acquired the habit of, when he was at work in the afternoon, of going to the cafeteria and buying a chocolate cookie and eating that cookie, obviously. Now, that does sound nice, but he gained a bit of weight and he decided it would be better for his health to stop eating that cookie every day. So, first of all, he had to figure out the components of his personal habit loop. He had to figure out how exactly his habit worked. To figure out the routine was rather easy. What he did was, he got up from his desk, he walked to the cafeteria, he bought a chocolate cookie and he ate that chocolate cookie in the cafeteria while talking with some colleagues he met there. More difficult was the reward. Now you may say, well, obviously the reward is getting a chocolate cookie, but that isn't necessarily correct. It is important to figure out which part exactly is the reward you specifically crave. So what Duhigg did was he experimented a bit with different variations of this routine to see what exactly was the reward he craved. For example, he tried, instead of going to the cafeteria, when he got the craving for that cookie, he tried to just go outside and take a walk. Because if the thing he actually craved would have been a short break and getting away from his desk, then this walk should have worked fine even without the cookie. Or he tried to just bring a cookie from home and eat it at his desk. If it was just the cookie, this should work. Or he tried to eat an apple instead of a cookie. If hunger and getting something to eat was the actual reward, then the apple should work. Or he tried getting a coffee instead of the cookie, because if he actually craved an energy boost, the coffee should work as well. Or he tried to visit a colleague and make a bit of conversation instead of going to the cafeteria, because if it was social interaction he craved, then this should work. And he tried all this variation and he always checked how it worked out. And he had a simple two-part check. First of all, when he returned to his desk, he would write down the first 3 things that came to his mind to have a quick impression of his mental state, of his emotional state at the moment. And then he set a timer to 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, when the timer went off, he would check, do I still have this craving to go to the cafeteria and get that cookie? And he tried all those variations, and it turned out what he really wanted, what he really craved, was this social interaction, this conversation with one of his colleagues. Now, I wonder how things would have worked out if it really would have been specifically the cookie, something sweet and sugary that would have been the reward. But he doesn't describe that in detail, unfortunately. So we know the routine and we know the reward. What's left to figure out is the cue. Now, fortunately, research has turned out that most habits have one of the following 5 things as a cue. Either it is the location, or it is the time, or the emotional state, or other people, or the immediately preceding action. Usually it's one of those 5. So what Duhigg did was simply, whenever he felt the urge to go get a cookie, he would on a piece of paper write down the answers to 5 simple questions. Where am I right now? How late is it at the moment? How do I feel? Who is with me? And what have I been doing right now? And he did this for a couple of days, 1 or 2 weeks maybe, and then he noticed, while the other factors were always different, always varied, what was pretty much always the same was the time. It was always between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon when he felt that urge to go to the cafeteria and get the cookie, so time was his cue. So, one thing to note, you might be dealing with a habit that is highly automatic, such as chewing on your fingernails, where you don't really notice the cue, but you only notice when you are already doing it, like, oh damn, I'm chewing my nails again, I wanted to stop doing that. Duhigg describes an example for a young lady who suffered from chewing her nails in The Power of Habit, and what was her approach to figuring out the cue was to carry a small card around with her, and whenever she noticed that she was chewing her nails, she made a check mark. And this led to her becoming aware of the nail biting and becoming aware of the situations where she would do it. So if you are dealing with such a habit, you might want to try this scorecard as a first step to help you figure out the actual cue. So we figured out the routine, the reward, and the cue. So the next step is to make a plan, to make a so-called implementation intention to implement this alternative routine. So what Duhigg did was he set an alarm to 3:30 in the afternoon, and whenever this alarm went off, he would go to a colleague's desk and talk to him for a few minutes. And he says it didn't always work, and it didn't work perfectly right away. For example, sometimes the alarm would go off, but he would be distracted by work and he would ignore it. Sometimes he would go to the cafeteria after all, but in that cases he would at least get tea instead of a cookie. But it worked frequently, and it worked more and more often over time. And after a while, this clock he used for the alarm broke, and he didn't have this alarm anymore, but the habit still continued. He would still perform this short visit to a colleague with a brief conversation in the afternoon, and he succeeded in stopping to eat that cookie each day. Now, one small note. You might be dealing with habits you perform frequently throughout the day, such as smoking or eating unhealthy snacks. Now, let's say you eat too much chocolate throughout the day. It is perfectly possible that you are, Duhigg doesn't explain this in detail, but I suspect that it is perfectly possible that we are dealing with a number of different habits then. Maybe sometimes we eat the chocolate because we are actually hungry. Maybe sometimes we eat it because we are nervous. Maybe sometimes we eat it because we have established certain links, like I always eat chocolate when I watch TV, or I always eat chocolate after lunch, things like that. So we might need to figure out and change different habits here. So now we know how to deal with bad habits. How do we go about if we want to establish a new good habit? Here we get plenty of tips and strategies from James Clear in Atomic Habits. And again, we use the habit loop. We rely on the habit loop. So obviously we need to figure out what is the routine we want to establish, what is it that we want to actually do. And here it is very important that we keep this routine as short and simple as possible. It doesn't matter how long we do something. What matters is how often we manage to repeat it, how often we manage to repeat the habit. So for example, if you want to exercise more, instead of planning to exercise for 1 hour each day right from the start, maybe start with just 1 or 2 days each week, and maybe with just 15 minutes of exercise. And if you manage to do that over a certain time, you can move on to maybe 3 days, maybe 30 minutes, and increase step by step. But start small, because then it will be easier to establish the habit, to establish the routine. And it is quite valuable to establish good habits. Both Clear and Duhigg point out that in studies it was often discovered, was frequently shown, that if people manage to establish good habits in some area of their lives, they will also improve their behavior in other areas that seem not connected at all. So for example, if people start exercising, they often also tend to eat better, things like that. So it does make a difference even if you start small. A nice strategy also to help with the motivation is to focus on the start. So for example, instead of making a plan to work out for 1 hour in the gym each Tuesday evening, you could make a plan that you will go to the gym each Tuesday evening. And even if you immediately turn around and go back home, you have fulfilled your plan. However, if you've reached the gym, you will probably also do some training while you are there. And it is a way smaller hurdle to just get there rather than to have this 1 hour workout. So this is a nice little strategy to help with your motivation. Clear also points out that we should prime our environment to support our efforts. So for example, if I plan to go running frequently, it is a good idea to have my running shoes ready and the clothing I need, so I can start right away without having to put a lot of effort into preparation. We can also automate some things. So for example, if I plan to save more money on a regular basis, I could set up some savings account with regular withdrawals, so I don't have to do it on my own all the time. Now that we know what routine we want to establish, the next step is to figure out a good cue, because if we don't establish a cue, we might end up not doing it at all. For example, if I say to myself, at work I will now take breaks on a regular basis and maybe do a bit of very light exercise there, something like that, I will probably end up in the evening of the day saying, work is over, I wanted to do those breaks, but I didn't really get around to do them and I totally forgot about them. So instead I might, for example, want to set a timer that will go off every hour to remind me, and make a specific plan, make an implementation intention. Whenever that hourly timer goes off, I will take a brief break for like 2 or 3 minutes, where I get up and stretch and take a deep breath to relax, and I will look out of the windows for a moment to relax my eyes, something like that. Apart from time and location, a good cue, a good idea is to stick to another action. For example, to stick to another habit that is already established. So, for example, I could make a plan after I've brushed my teeth, which is a habit I already established. After I brushed my teeth, I will floss. Clear also points out that we should highlight cues for good habits and hide cues for bad habits. So for example, if I want to eat healthier, it is a good idea to put fruit in a bowl on the table in the living room where I see it all the time, and I might end up taking and eating some, and to put the chocolate in some drawer where it is not visible, or not to buy the chocolate in the first place. So we've got routine and cue, but we still need a reward that we crave. And of course, this reward is quite important, because if I get a reward at the end, I will basically say, this was nice, I will repeat that. And if I have a strong craving for the reward, I will go through with my habit the next time. Now, a problem is, as Clear points out, that a lot of the things that are healthy, that are useful to our lives, like exercise, healthy eating, and healthy diet, and so on, that they have delayed rewards. Things like exercise and healthy diet have lots of positive effects. Like you might lose weight, you might feel better, be more healthy, you might avoid a lot of health risks, feel better, and so on. However, all of those occur in the future. But we focus on rewards that occur right away. So what we need to do is to figure out ways to have an immediate reward for those good and healthy habits. Now, Clear says what we should try to do is to associate those habits with positive feelings, to turn the whole thing into a positive experience. And a good start for that is a short motivation ritual we perform up front. Before we start with the actual habit, we could, for example, listen to our favorite song, or have a cup of tea and relax for a moment, or even just take a deep breath and consciously relax for a few seconds even. So we start the habit, we start the routine in a good mood. And after we finish our habit, we could afterwards do something we want to do something we really like. For example, after I've trained at the gym, as I had planned, I will watch an episode from my favorite series to reward myself and to have this association of sport and watching my favorite series that belongs together. Another good idea is to track our habits. So, for example, to make check marks in the calendar or something like that, to make my progress visible to me, so I can be proud of myself. So I can say, hey, great, this week I performed this short exercise every single day. I did so well. To make this progress visible to myself, so I have this small win, I have this experience of success and achievement. And finally, social support can be a great help. So, for example, if I want to exercise, I could do it together with friends or family, and it will be more fun that way. Or I could join some sports club to be around people who like to exercise as well. And it is even helpful to just tell other people about my plans. For example, I could tell my girlfriend, I will now perform a short workout of 30 minutes every Tuesday evening, because this will help me really go through with it. Because after I stated this intent, I don't want to disappoint other people. Clear even recommends to create a habit contract where there is some punishment if I fail to stick to my habit, such as I will pay a certain sum of money, I will donate a certain sum of money to some organization whenever I don't go through with my training. No matter if you want to get rid of a bad habit or establish a good habit, the most important thing is that you stick to it, because we are talking about a process here that takes some time. If you manage to go to the gym 3 times, that's great, but it doesn't yet establish a habit. Or if you managed not to eat the chocolate for a few days, you still have some way to go. So this is really the challenge here. Stick to it, then things will work out fine. Anyways, I wish you a lot of success and fun in dealing with your personal habits. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, I would be quite happy about a like and a subscription. We will see each other in the next video. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.